Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello there, welcome along. This is Business Connections Live, the program for entrepreneurs, SMEs and business owners. Now, on today's show, we're going to be discussing how to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. I know it's the B word. Now, you must be sick of it by now. We all are. The trouble is, actually, we should still maintain an interest when it comes to Brexit. It's very important because it does have implications not only for us personally, but also for our business operations as well. So what should we be doing right now as business owners to just prepare for whatever the outcome is? Joining me in the studio today is Linda Besant, barrister, GDPR consultant, and also co-founder of Business Connections Live. Linda, it's lovely to have you in the studio as opposed to sitting outside and talking to all our guests and finding out what they do. Linda, it's an interesting time. We've got the big vote taking place tomorrow.
Yes.
Now, I know people may be watching this retrospectively, but go on then, lay us a bet. What do you think will happen tomorrow?
I still don't think it's going to go through.
No?
No, and I think we're heading for no deal.
This time next week, we'll be able to say you were wrong. It'll go through at flying colours. You don't think so?
I think it'll go on and on and on to the wire.
You really do?
Yes, I do.
Do you think, in your opinion, from what you've seen, and you've been doing a lot of research, I know you've done a lot of work when it comes to the different regulations that are coming in, but from what you've seen, do you think that the EU will capitulate at the very last minute? Because they seem to do that. They have a history at the very last moment. Are they waking up to the realisation that this could damage them too?
I think they are, and the reason for that is because they have members, they are made up of member states. They've actually been dealing with us on behalf of those member states at the moment, but I think some of the member states are starting to get a little bit nervous as well and saying, look, you're actually going to affect our exports to the UK. Maybe we need to readdress the original agreement and start negotiating it a little bit harder, perhaps.
When it comes to things like the backstop, and this is, of course, where the whole thing about trade comes in.
Yes.
Will we end up, do you think, regardless of what it is, either a no deal or a very, very, very soft Brexit? Is that where we're heading, do you think?
I think it's difficult to tell. However, with regard to the backstop, I heard an interview with Peter Lilly, Lord Lilly, and he was saying that with regard to the Irish backstop, he's heard nobody say who is going to police that. He said, who is building this backstop wall? Is it the UK? Is it the Irish? Is it the EU? He said, no one seems to be rushing forward and saying, we're going to be doing that. So he
sounds
said,
a bit Trumpish, doesn't it, in what's going on here? It sounds
yes,
like a Trump wall.
Yes, actually it does. And the Deputy Minister in Ireland was on Andrew Marr yesterday morning talking, and Andrew Marr asked him, what uniform will the people at the border be wearing? Whose uniform are they wearing? And he bypassed the question.
Because he doesn't know, does he?
No, of course he doesn't, because nobody knows at the moment.
We are running out of time, aren't we? As businesses, there's still this absolute uncertainty going around at the moment. Where should we and what should we, do you think, be looking at? If there is a no-deal Brexit and we end up with World Trade Organization, WTO rules, I mean, is that something that we have to join? Is that something that we have to go in and negotiate? Are there restrictions within that? Those are questions there. First of all, do we have to join it?
We don't have to join the WTO. We were members of the WTO before we joined the EU.
So are we still members then?
We are still members of the WTO. So although the EU negotiates on our behalf at the moment, gives us a blanket negotiation, once we leave, we are members of the WTO, but it's just a case of rearranging schedules, which are quotas and tariffs and licences and export licences and that sort of thing.
It does seem that the politicians haven't allowed businesses enough time to organise and get those particular systems in place. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I think the problem is we've had 2 years. But the problem is, because we don't actually know exactly what the outcome is going to be, it's been difficult for business to prepare, because they don't know exactly whether we're going to leave, hard Brexit, soft Brexit, no deal, what's happening. Very, very difficult to arrange your business because of all the money that you have to spend on the preparedness for that particular outcome.
Fundamentally, this could all be resolved if they turned around and said you can have a trade deal with us and it's the same trade deal you got now. That fundamentally is it, isn't it?
Might be a bit simplistic, but it would make it a lot easier.
Who are you calling simple? But it's true though, isn't it? That's ultimately what we want.
Yes.
We want it to be brought back to what we were when we were in the EEC.
Yes. And until we actually can sort through the withdrawal agreement, we actually can't even start to talk about trade.
You're in the world of law, and that's what you deal with. You had a lot of fun with GDPR, and that's still an ongoing issue that people don't realise. That's going to bring other problems, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Let's talk a little bit about GDPR, because that's also in the forefront of a lot of people's minds. The General Data Protection Regulation was brought in at the beginning May of last year. So we've got a regulation that came in that was a European directive.
A regulation, not a directive.
A European regulation. What will be the ongoing consequences with that? What happens then to data? We were talking to a large multinational organisation that has representatives across Europe. They have to share data across Europe. What's going to happen to organisations that have maybe got a base here in the UK, maybe customers abroad, but they currently are sharing data between those different locations? What's going to happen to them?
Well, we're heading in the direction of being regarded as what's called a third country. So we are not regarded as adequate with regard to the way that we protect data. So what will happen is that we can still send data from the UK into the EU, but we cannot have EU data coming into the UK. Any company that deals with EU data coming into the UK, or indeed sending EU data outside of the UK onto a third party, will have to have specific agreements in place.
Well,
with
individual agreements with each of the people that they send it to?
They will have to renegotiate their agreements, and they will have to have specific clauses that they can get from the Information Commissioner's Office, that are standard contractual clauses so that the people that are giving their data to us can say that they are confident that when they give us the data, that we will be dealing with it in the same structure as GDPR is in the EU.
Is it not true, though, that we were one of the driving forces behind GDPR in the first place?
We had a big hand in putting together the privacy regulations that we have at the moment, but the Data Protection Act that came into force, which obviously recognises GDPR, once we leave, there are areas that we can change within data protection if we wish to. There are no noises in that direction at the moment, but one of the other problems is that our Information Commissioner, who is regarded as a supervisory authority within Europe at the moment, will no longer be regarded as a supervisory authority, and that will cause other problems as well, because we will be regarded as a third country. So what we're trying to negotiate at the moment is some sort of recognition within Europe that we are adequate for the purposes of them transferring the data to us.
How is America considered to Europe?
As far as America is concerned, with regard to privacy...
Will we be okay talking to America? Are they forcing us to look the other way? Instead of looking at Europe and aligning more with Europe, we'll end up, God help us all, aligning more with the States?
Do you know, I really don't think that's going to happen. I think that there will be a lot of dealings with the US, but I still think that individually, because of the different member states within the EU, they want to deal with us. We want to deal with them. It just makes sense to get round the table and sort it out.
I mean, the stuff that I've read kind of suggests as well that the French agricultural industry is going to be hit, the German car industry is going to be hit very hard.
Yes.
And it just seems that what's happened is that in Brussels, the politicians have been playing politics.
Yes.
And really, they haven't been playing business.
And I think you're right, which is, as I said at the beginning, the reason that the member states are now talking to the Commission saying, look, we appreciate the fact you're dealing on our behalf, but here are the problems you're going to cause. So, for example, the EU exports more in goods to the UK than we export to them. Now, cars from Germany, there could be tariffs up to 10% on cars if we come out with a no-deal Brexit. From France, wines, dairy and fruit. 12% of Italian exports go to the UK. So there's a lot of jitteriness within
And the thing
member
is that
states.
those tariffs that would be applied then to France, Germany, Italy on the produce that they or the products they produce, those tariffs actually are in place at the moment for importers of Japanese vehicles. So they're already paying a tariff.
Yes.
So all of a sudden we have this equal playing field, don't we? Particularly with the car industry. So we'll see a 10% increase in the price of European-produced vehicles here in the UK, but Japanese vehicles or vehicles from the Middle East or whatever, they're going to remain where they are because they've always had that 10% tariff on them.
Depending on the agreements that have actually been negotiated, yes.
Small businesses, you know, they are the heartbeat of this country. 99% of all businesses in the UK are SMEs and the like, small operations. Is there something, do you think it really is going to affect them, or is it only going to affect the ones that are exporting?
No, it's going to affect all of them, and the reason for that is that it could increase costs for small businesses across the board purely because of what they buy. So if they're buying, so for example, a particular piece of equipment, and within which some of the components of that equipment have come from the EU, that could increase the cost to the small business when they're buying that piece of equipment.
So there's going to be there are things they need to be doing right now. We'll be looking at the things that you need to be doing right now in your business at the moment. We're also going to be looking at how you can prepare. The consequences of being a third country. We've kind of touched on that already. The UK is a member of the WTO, and the status of employees post-Brexit, I think that's going to be a real issue as well. And of course, the timing of this is now becoming extremely critical because come March, when whatever kind of Brexit we actually negotiate in the end, the Inland Revenue, of course, on the 1st of April, introducing their brand new tax burden on small businesses as well. And I've only this morning started hearing advertising on the radio concerning that. So another abysmal position. And of course, the Inland Revenue at the moment seem to be having all sorts of problems with their computer systems sending out fines prior to the close date of when tax should be.
For which they've apologised, however.
Well, that's very nice of them, isn't it? You know, our servants, remember, they are our servants. Listen, more from Linda in just a few moments' time. Hope you're enjoying today's program. Listen, it's a slightly different angle, I suppose, on what you've heard. The trouble is that when you hear politicians on the TV and on the radio talking about Brexit, they are talking from a political standpoint. What we're trying to say today is this is how you should be considering the whole world of Brexit and how it could apply to you as an individual and as a small business owner, or even a large business owner for that matter. So stay tuned, more from Linda in just a few moments' time. Bet you didn't know that about GDPR. How frightening is that? It's terrifying, isn't it? So we've just got over one GDPR incident and now somebody's become a third country. What are going to be the implications to you? You know, do you have databases? Are you an organisation that has databases that you have to share with overseas offices? Do you have your customers when they go overseas? How do you share the data then? It's a nightmare. Anyway, more to come from Linda in just a moment, our barrister and GDPR consultant. You're watching Business Connections Live. On our last show, we talked to Jerry Brown. He is the Chief Customer Rescue Officer, and the program was Lies, Damn Lies, and the Wrong Statistics. As I always say, statistics can show you anything you want it to do. But within your business, when you're looking at the customer experience, are you looking at the right statistics to actually make it worthwhile to implement any findings that you get from them? Well, Jerry put together a great program. It was an interesting discussion in what should be done when it comes to, it's not easy for me to say, to statistics. And we talked a little bit about the lies, the damned lies, and the wrong statistics on last week's edition of Business Connections Live. On today's show, we're going to be discussing lies, damn lies, and the wrong statistics. What a great title that is. Joining me in the studio today is Jerry Brown. He's the Chief Customer Rescue Officer.
Well, what we're talking about is the fact that many businesses rely on a whole range of statistics. Customer feedback, what's going on in their operations, whether they're in a contact center, in the store, it doesn't matter what it is. They're all relying on statistics to help them do a better job. But more often than not, they're looking at the wrong things. The reason that they missed the crash in 2008 is because they were looking at probably things that they looked at before. They went, oh, well, we've had this before, this never happened before, and this is how they evaluated it. So they were using, perhaps you'd say they were outdated statistics. But the thing is, and as you mentioned about customer experience and customer service, is that people for a long time have used things as an example. In the world of customer service, they use what they call Net Promoter Score, NPS. And this is a very simple metric that's been around quite a few years. And it simply asks a question. Would you recommend this organization to your friends or colleagues? Or again, as long as you're looking at a number of different things. One of the things that's getting a lot of play these days, and I'm seeing it as I read a lot of people writing about customer experience and customer service, is the role that emotions are playing. And emotions in terms of how we interact. In other words, what did we feel like when we interacted with a business? This is about, to me, this is respecting customers. If you want my feedback, I'm happy to give it to you, good or bad. I'm happy to give it to you if you tell me or convince me that something's going to happen with it. Are you finding that customers are being honest with you? And for the most part, of course, they're not. So as I said earlier, there isn't a magic bullet. There isn't one or a number of questions. It depends on the business that you're in as to what will work for you. So this is what, again, the more enlightened companies are doing. They're using speech and text analytics to look at verbatim comments from customers, because you're right, the emotion comes through there. When I talked earlier about baseball and Bill James, one of the things that Bill James said years and years ago was that the words mean something. Numbers don't always, but words mean something. So if you ask me to give you some feedback, and rather than just saying, would you recommend this company, you say, what did that experience feel like? I think one of the things that I see a lot is that historically organizations, especially those that are dealing with both online and phone interactions, are using operational metrics. So quite often you'll see things like, we aim to answer all of our calls within 10 seconds or 3 rings or something like that. And within the business, you'll hear this thing called average handle time, which means the length of time that someone takes to handle a customer inquiry. But if you start adding in some other things, some other customer metrics. So let's say you took 2 people and you said, this person's average handle time is 2.5 minutes. This person is 5 minutes. This person is obviously not very good. So we've got to change their performance. But if you added in revenue or whatever other important statistic was and said, wait a minute, this person that's on the phone for 5 minutes on each call, their average revenue is 2, 3, 4 times more because they've taken time, they've spent time with the customer, they've really understood their needs, and they've been successful in either making the sale or, in whatever the situation was, having a really good customer outcome. Hi, I am Jerry Brown, the customer lifeguard, saving the world from bad customer service. And I think what I would say in response to that is you've just really stolen all my thunder with that last bit of information from Qualtrics. And just to be clear, as I said, I am not a secret Qualtrics employee. I just happen to think that the work they're doing is really great work, and as a result, that's the kind of thing. So to put that in a nutshell, really understand what it is you're looking to find. That sounds obvious, but as I said earlier, people have been looking at the same things for so long that they become jaundiced and they're not really seeing what's there. Make sure that you actually do act on it. Again, you saw that in the Qualtrics piece. If you can't act, don't ask. In other words, don't ask people for advice or information if you're not prepared to do something with it. And make sure that within your organization that everyone that needs to see that, and even if you think they don't need to see it, everyone that needs to see that gets the information, gets shared, because so many businesses I've dealt with, they've told me, you know what, we didn't know that. We had no idea that was going on. So those are the 3 things. There are many others, but those are the things that I think will get you started to make sure that you don't have lies, damn lies, and the wrong statistics.
Jerry Brown from last week's edition, or the week before last week's edition of Business Connections Live. Really good programme there, and our thanks to Jerry for coming in. He's got a new book out. That's on Amazon as well if you want to check that particular book out. If you enjoyed the programme, or if you enjoy any of the other programmes, there's over 250 or so different shows, over 300 hours of great business advice available for you right now to watch and to inwardly digest. Programme now is what, 4 years old?
Yes.
4 years old, the programme.
Nearly
So
5.
there's a whole load of stuff that you can watch if you go to our channel. If you'd like a programme like this one, and it does work, it really does work as a calling card just to tell people about your organisation or your business. It's dead easy to do that. All you got to do is get in contact with us here at Business Connections Live, and that is just so easy to do. Studio at businessconnectionslive.com is our email address. If you wish, you can also pick up the dog and bone and give us a call on 01784 256 777. Have a word either with myself or with Linda for that matter, and find out a bit more on how we can apply the programme or something similar to the programme to your organisation. You can also follow our stream of consciousness as well at BCL Business TV. You can leave comments and get involved with the channel on our Facebook page. And if you go to the main website at businessconnectionslive.com, you can actually download a free book on how to present better to camera. Take 2. Where am I taking this? Or you can download a book that teaches you how to speak properly. Or you can download the book that shows you how to learn a little bit more about doing interviews on radio and television. What a great promo that turned into, wasn't it? Listen, you're watching Business Connections Live. It's good to have your company, as always, on a Monday. So my guest on today's show is Linda Bazant. She's a GDPR consultant. She's also a barrister and co-owner of Business Connections Live. We're talking all things when it comes to how to prepare for a no-deal Brexit today. Let's talk about contracts, because not a lot of people do talk about contracts, and I think it's time that we did. Now, we're not going to bore you silly on this, are we?
No.
But there are occasions, there are things within contracts that people currently have, maybe for their employees, or contracts that they've got with other companies that they're dealing with, that they need to be aware of. Where should they start?
Well, they should start by going through the contract. They need to look at things like their right to terminate, their right to amend the contract, their jurisdiction for if there are any proceedings that come out of the negotiations on that contract. Some companies are looking to get out of contracts that they have already entered into.
Are they looking and thinking that regardless of what happens when it comes to the end of March, if it's we'll call it a hard Brexit, if it is a WTO Brexit, that the contracts are then null and void?
That is a possibility, but let me give you an example. The European Medicines Agency are currently in the High Court, even as we speak. They have signed with Canary Wharf a 21-year contract for tenancy in a Canary Wharf office. Now, because of Brexit, they're now saying, look, we can't go ahead with this because we need to be based in Europe, so we're not going to carry on with the tenancy. Now, this tenancy was signed, I believe, in 2014. Mm-hmm. So they're now saying to the landlord, we want to pull out, and the landlord is saying, you signed up for 21 years. They are citing frustration of contract because of Brexit. Now, the argument is, was Brexit foreseeable in 2014? And that is the argument in the court at the moment. So you cannot frustrate a contract if the item that frustrated it was foreseeable.
Do you think a few manufacturers, a few companies, a few organisations are using Brexit now as an excuse? We look at Jaguar Land Rover as one example, JLR, and the situation that they've got themselves into. Of course, they were led down the garden path by previous governments about diesel manufacturing. The diesel was the way forward, so they put all their efforts into building diesel Range Rovers and diesel Evoques and diesel XFs, and then everyone went, oh, we don't want diesel anymore, and it's kind of screwed them around a teeny weeny bit. So are they using Brexit to cover up a mistake between government and them as manufacturers when it comes to the manufacturing of what they do? Their diesel engines, they've got great stockpiles and they can't sell the damn things.
I think, as far as Jaguar Land Rover are concerned, Brexit is a misnomer. They have known for many years now that diesel was starting to be the bad guy, if you like, but they did nothing about it. On their production line, they should have looked at electric cars, for example, a little bit more into that, a little bit more into petrol.
The I-Pace is available, by the way, from your local Jaguar dealer.
Aiming for a car.
Other electric cars are available.
So they knew a long time ago that diesel was going down the route of the fact that but people a long time ago stopped buying diesel cars. It wasn't even from 2016, it was before that. So Jaguar Land Rover's management should have looked at the long-term prospects for JLR and they didn't.
All
And
right.
if they're using Brexit as an excuse, it's an excuse.
But are you seeing other organisations as well using Brexit as an excuse to downscale to get rid of current employees? Because, Dyson, for instance, there's a lot in the news about Dyson moving his headquarters to Singapore. I think he's in the top 20 when it comes to taxpayers, when it comes to taxation in the UK. He's effectively moving 2 people to Singapore because he sees it as an emerging market. It seems to me commercially the right decision to be making.
Yes, I would agree. I think that there's been an awful lot of controversy about the decision that he's made, but he's making a business decision, and the same as everybody else has to. Post-Brexit, what are we going to blame then? Once we're out, I mean, we get, say, 2 years' time, for example, say we leave on the 29th of March. In 2 years' time, businesses need to be assessing how Brexit is going to affect them now. They should have been doing it way before Christmas last year, easily.
But everyone is making the excuse that we've been hanging on to find out exactly what's been going on. The linguistics that have been, if it didn't happen, if it doesn't happen, we stay in the EU, we end up taking the euro, and we become. If you're feeling a bit ill at the moment, I do apologise about that. But if that is the situation and we find ourselves in there, or we have a Brexit in name only, and we end up still under the regulations of the EU, there's going to be civil revolt on that. And we're kind of going down the politics of this.
Yes, we're not doing
and that really isn't what we're here to talk about today. But let's go back to contracts then. So contracts. What about people who are employed, overseas employment contracts?
Now, as far as people employed in the UK, there may not be too much of a difference, especially with regard to Theresa May coming out and saying that anyone that's already here in the UK can just apply to stay, and they were going to charge them £65
But it won't any longer?
They won't any longer. So
It's shocking, isn't it?
probably with regard to employees, it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But until they come up with a little bit more meat around exactly what Brexit is going to be, I think any EU people are relatively safe, and probably UK people in the EU are quite safe at the moment too.
On the date that we're meant to leave, there's actually 2 years where really not very much is going to happen anyway, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
But that's if we get a deal. If we don't get a deal, what happens then? Is it 2 years? Is it 2 years of nothingness?
It won't be too. No, of course it won't be. We switch over to WTO. We're already a member of WTO anyway. And the only problem that we've got, well, there isn't a problem there.
The only problem, this is very good. Mr. Corbyn, please be listening. The only problem we have is?
We have to put together exactly what we're going to be doing with regard to quotas and tariffs and subsidies. Because one of the issues that we may have in the WTO, and there are 164 members of the WTO, is that if we start subsidising, for example, our farmers over and above normal subsidies, they could complain to the WTO that we are over-subsidising that particular area. So we've got to look at things like that. They could object to the way that we do our quotas, for example. However, even if they object, it doesn't stop us from dealing on WTO rules straight away, because any issue that any of the other members have could take 2 years to resolve.
How many other members are there of the WTO, do you know, off the top of your head?
164.
You just said that, didn't you? 164 members.
Yes.
And how diverse countries are they? What kind of countries are in? Is it the rest of the world?
Well, pretty much.
After Europe?
Pretty much, yes. I mean, you can go onto the WTO site and find out who else is a member.
It's interesting because what we're looking at, thank you very much, I'll do that after the programme. It's very interesting, isn't it, the way that we're moving forward on this, because the EU is changing. The EU is still very dynamic on what's going on. But you talked earlier on that there seems to be 2 EUs. There's the one that Lithuania and Romania, and there's a number of new countries that want to join at the moment. And yet we've got civil unrest. We've got the breaking of rules as far as France is concerned. We've got the German car industry. We've got Greece, still a basket case, excuse my language. Italy isn't a lot better. There's a real issues there. Do Do you think that, I mean, we keep drifting back to the politics of it. Do you think it would have been better just to wait and been... It's a bit like being on the Titanic and people just moving deck chairs around, isn't it, with the EU? Is it sinking? I'm not certain.
Well, remember that the EU isn't just dealing with Brexit. They're dealing with normal EU day-to-day issues on behalf of their members. So it's not just about Brexit. They're looking after all of the other countries' day-to-day operations as well.
But, I mean, it's interesting as well. Just have whisper, Macedonia, Turkey, Iceland, Albania, just some of the countries that are joining. It does seem to be a union of two halves, doesn't it? And they've got a lot of work to do, haven't they, to get their house in order to become part of the EU.
Yes, they have, and perhaps if they had got their house in order a few years ago, like, for example, when David Cameron went over there, and I think, to be fair, there are lots of things that they recognise that they need to address on behalf of their members, but it should have been done a long time ago. If it had been, maybe we wouldn't be in this position today, maybe we would still be members of the EU.
Let's have a look at this. How to obtain licenses, certificates or other authorisations. What kind of things should we be looking at to get ready for the leave if it does happen?
Well, some of the licences and certificates that will already be in place are probably EU certificates and licences, which as part of the EU we just naturally become part of. But of course those licences and certificates may no longer apply after the 29th of March. So people need to look at exactly what they're going to do. Is there another route into those licences and certificates? What organisations do they have to join that can operate on their behalf to get said licences and certificates, for example?
Do you think the kicking that we're going to get if we do leave is going to be in the fact that everything, because of circumstances, has meant that we've ended up leaving everything so late? And in fact, the dip that we will see, if there is a dip, or if maybe there won't be a dip, but whatever will happen at that point will be due to the fact that everyone goes, oh my word, we've got to do this, and now only got this time to do it.
Yes, that's true, but not just true of us, but true of all of the member states as well.
Because they're not preparing for it either. They think they are.
Although Calais seem to feel that they are prepared for it with regard to border crossings and so on. They're saying that there shouldn't be a problem. And if you think about it sensibly, everything cannot just stop on the 30th of March, after the midnight on the 29th, because things naturally have a progression. There will be deals done, and so I don't think that we're going to have aircraft sitting on tarmacs, for example, and that sort of thing.
Well, they've already agreed that's not going to happen, haven't
Well,
they?
exactly.
More from Linda in just a few moments' time. Linda Bazant joining me in the studio today. We're talking about how to prepare for Brexit, personal data. We'll be looking at that in just a few moments. So a little bit more at the certification and authorisations that you're going to need. We'll have a bit of a chat as well, if we may, a little bit about the backstop. Is that okay to have? Yeah, just what your views on that are. Be very interesting.
Well,
you said already, didn't you?
As we discussed earlier, the backs, nobody seems to be coming forward as to exactly who is policing this backstop, who's putting it all in place. Is it the EU? Is it the Irish? Is it the UK? Hopefully, some of the negotiations that go on over the next few weeks will negate the need for a backstop.
She said optimistically. That's very good. I must admit, I don't know about you, but I am just sorely disappointed with the way this has been handled on all our behalves, regardless of whether we're in, out or shake it all about. Regardless of the situation we find ourselves in, it does seem that the politicians have played politics and the businesses are the ones that are going to take the hit when it comes to financially what's going to happen as far as Brexit is concerned. More from Linda in just a few moments' time. We're going to stay on the subject of Brexit. I think it's a good thing to do. We're going to be looking at your supply chain. Is it Brexit ready? Paul Mayhew joined us in the studio in November of last year. He was very, very positive. He said there were a number of things that businesses can do to make certain that if we are in a no deal, then we will be okay. What he was saying, he said, it's a no deal. What will the effects likely be on company supply chains in terms of delays, costs, and what actions should companies be taking to understand the risks and what can still be done to mitigate them even at this late stage. This is another reason, of course, the car manufacturers, because they work on a just-in-time principle of manufacturing. The goods turn up just in time to go onto the production line. And what they're saying is if there are delays and there are hold-ups at the different ports, then the just-in-time system will not work. But come on, guys, you must have thought of a system or a way around it. It was a great show, but Paul, we'll just give you the key takeaways from that particular show on Business Connections Live.
So, I'm Paul Mayhew. I run Wyndham Solutions, and it's all about Brexit supply chain. I think the critical thing, and the message I've been trying to get over today, is try and be as prepared as you can for all the various scenarios that are coming towards you. We don't yet know if it's going to be a no deal, if it's going to be hard, soft, whatever it may turn out to be. There are things your organisation should and could be doing to prepare yourselves, understand your own company's position, what your exposures are and what your opportunities are. Don't forget, Brexit is also an opportunity. It's not all about bad news. It's about how you move ahead of the competition. And I greatly believe if you do some of the things that I'm talking about, you can actually be more advanced than your competitor, win business out of this, and open up new horizons for your organisation. So please reach out, talk about Brexit, and let's work together to move you forward.
It's very easy, isn't it, on this particular programme to drift onto the political side. Rolson's just popped into the studio from outside. He said, leave the politics alone, Highland. Point taken. We're trying to give you the advice that you need within your organisation, what you should be looking at. Let's talk a little bit about the taxes, Lynn, and VAT and things like that. How's that going to apply to businesses?
Well, because we're part of the EU at the moment, with regard to VAT, for example, there are all the EU and the UK have an agreement with regard to VAT and tax. And of course, once we leave, the VAT issues raise their head again. Is HMRC ready to explain to us exactly what we need to do when we're dealing with EU member states with regard to VAT and tax?
And the question is, are they? What's the indications from the HMRC?
I think that we're going to be waiting another few weeks before we get anything concrete, to be honest.
All right, so we're still waiting on them. Let's then talk about a little bit more of the contractual area when we're looking at personal contracts, people that are employed that have come to the UK, or UK citizens who are going to the UK and they're looking at that. What should we be looking at?
Well, as I said earlier, as far as EU and UK employees are concerned, I don't think that there's going to be too much of an issue there. So I'd hold fire on that at the moment, because I honestly don't think that there's going to be a problem with employees EU, UK. With regard to contracts, as we were talking about, just general contracts, if you took contracts out, say for example in 2015, for example, you took out a 5-year contract with an EU counterpart, it's worth now going back and having a look at the terms on that contract, because you may find on the 29th of March there are areas of that contract that no longer apply, that you will be in, you could find yourselves in default of. So you need to have a look.
Can you give an example?
So, for example, do you have the right to terminate the contract? Do you have the right to amend the contract? What jurisdiction is so it may well be that you've got a contract that says that if anything goes wrong, the hearing would take place in the UK, for example. It would be English courts that would have jurisdiction, or it may be that the Spanish court has jurisdiction or the German court has jurisdiction. Go back and double check those, just to make absolutely certain that you may need to agree, disagree. The general consensus of opinion is that the Hague Convention will kick in, and that any jurisdiction that has been agreed will probably still be relevant. But it's worth talking to your lawyers about the contracts that you have with regard to jurisdiction, your right to terminate, and any amendments to existing contracts that you might want to make. So, for example, you might be dealing in euros at the moment. Do you want to change that to dollars now? What's going to happen to the pound once we exit? What's going to happen to the euro once we exit? Have a look at your currencies.
What about licensing and things like that? Licensing and products. If we're dealing with a European manufacturer and perhaps we may be importing from there, we've had all the different standards, those kind of things. What happens with those?
Well, that's another issue that's in contention. As far as pharma is concerned, the general consensus of opinion is that's still probably going to be okay. But licenses for other products, for example, components. Now, at the moment, some of the components that go into a product, for example, that might be sent out of an EU country, so let's take Germany for example, they might buy some of their components from the UK to put into that particular item and then send it on a free trade agreement to other countries throughout the world. Now, generally speaking, it should say, the contract normally says that, for example, 60% of the components must be EU components. Well, at the moment, the UK is part of the EU, and it may be that 10% of that component is a UK component. Now, after the 29th of March, that would mean that the EU, when dealing with outside countries, the components are 50% EU, because the UK is no longer a member of the EU. So there could be problems caused to the EU there, for example.
Do you think we might see legislation change as far as the EU is concerned to compensate for that?
As far as the EU is concerned, you
so
mean
in other words, what they do, they change what their standards are. So they no longer go 60%.
That would have to be a negotiation of the trade agreement that they have with other countries.
But the chances of that happening few and far between.
No, they won't change this. But of course, we've got to change our law because an awful lot of our laws have now got EU contingencies in them. And so what we will be doing, and it's going to take a very long time, is we're going to have to go through all of our laws and change them back to UK law. However, having said that, there is an awful lot of EU law that we will probably keep within our contracts because it's sensible to do that.
All right. Wouldn't it be just easy to go everything that's currently in place at the moment we're going to keep in place?
No, and the reason for that is that some of the reasons why people wanted to leave the EU are because of some of the laws that have come over from the EU and they want them changed.
So that's the reason they're going to be, that's not going to work at all then, is it?
Exactly.
All right, so the next step then is, let's talk a little bit more about the handling of personal data. You mentioned earlier on that we will become a third country, and we talked a little bit about the fact that some of it's going to be, we're going to be dealing both with the US, we're going to be dealing with other world countries as well. What kind of problems will becoming a third country have on businesses that got databases and the like?
Well, if they are bringing data in from EU citizens, there might be a problem there in as much as, because we are regarded as a third country, the companies in the EU are not allowed to send their data unless they have assurances that we have adequate provision for the safety of that data. They'll also want to know what we are doing with it when we receive it. Are we sending it on to countries outside of that parameter that perhaps don't have the same level of protection that we do have here in the UK and in the EU?
But I mean, this does open a whole can, doesn't it? The whole thing of travel insurances, all that kind of thing.
Yes.
It's really going to cause real hassle when it comes, because we are digital data, aren't we?
Yes.
Each individual is. So do you think there is a contingency already in place at the moment, do you think?
Well, the government are trying to negotiate with the EU, generally speaking, to keep our information commissioner, for example, as part of the status quo with regard to being regarded as a supervisory authority. As to whether that will actually happen or not, I can't really say. However, we do know that our information commissioner is one of the most stringent in the world. So there's no reason why they couldn't be trusted with the data that is brought into the UK. And the ICO, of course, will be coming out with some rules and regulations that they would expect us to follow, which won't be too far different from GDPR.
So we could actually see a complete change in GDPR then?
It won't be a complete change. The Data Protection Act allows us to make some changes, but generally speaking, data protection and GDPR is belt and braces. There would be little reason for us to change an awful lot of that, but because of the way that the UK will deal with the rest of the world going forward, we need the ability to be able to tweak some of it if we need to in the way that we deal with it. And another issue, not necessarily on data protection, some of the rules and regulations that have come out of the EU that we currently abide by have made it difficult for other countries outside of the EU to deal with us because of the stringency. And if we are now allowed to say, well, look, let's step back from that and maybe we could lessen the requirements on that, it might make it easier for some other countries to deal with us.
So it is, take it with one hand and give it another, isn't it? Because if we lessen our our standards, what's actually going to happen then is that we won't be able to trade with Europe.
Yes, and that's going to be an issue. So we're going to have to find a common ground somewhere.
And if those standards are dropped, will Europe still be, if we drop our standards, Europe would still be able to trade with us, though, would they?
They'd still be able to trade with us, but as to whether they would accept the standards that we have would be another matter, and that would be down to negotiation.
Listen, one thing I do want to talk about, I want to talk about customs duties and paperwork and things like that. Paul Mayhew has alluded to the fact that we can actually get through all that. Just to give a bit of an introduction, because that's the last thing I want us to talk about today, I think, and other thoughts that come to my head. Where should we be going when it comes to customs duties and paperwork? How big an encumbrance is that going to be on businesses?
Well, an awful lot of businesses that export at the moment, for example, probably don't just export to the EU, they probably export to other countries as well. So they're already aware of customs duties and tariffs and the paperwork that they need to be filling out. Of course, the problem is that our exports, an awful lot of our exports do go to the EU, and therefore they need to look at the administration that they've got in their business. They need to look at increased paperwork. They need to look at customs duties and the possibility of what they might be. So they need to look at not just the administration, they need to look at their budgets, because it's going to cost them money, and it is. And that's the sensible way to look at it. But having said that, if they look at their budgets going forward, they can look at it long term rather than just short term, because at the moment everyone's talking about the 29th of March, what's going to happen this year. Look at, in the way that you would normally look at your contingencies and budgets for your business over a 3 and 5 year period. That's what you need to be looking at now.
Do you think businesses should be looking at exporting more to everywhere but the EU?
No. No, we'll have an arrangement with the EU in the same way that we will do with the rest of the world. And as time goes on, it will level out.
More from Linda in just a few moments' time here on this edition of Business Connections Live. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the live programme on a Monday. Interesting, we steered away there from the politics. I think we did a very good, nearly, pretty much. Did a pretty good job there, I think, didn't you? Yeah, okay, thank you. All right then, let's ask you to help us now here at Business Connections Live. Interestingly, if you are an organisation or a business at the moment that's looking to expand into America, the whole country should be thinking about that at the moment, and you're looking for a platform to do that on, please do get in contact with us. We've got some interesting news to tell you. You can get in touch with us here. I'll just give the emails and the telephone numbers. Drop us an email to studio@businessconnectionslive.com. If you're interested in expanding into America and you'd like access to an audience of 25 million. This is on affiliate radio and television stations up and down the States and across the United States of America, both in vision and on the radio too. And that's something that excites you, then why don't you get in touch with us? If you are a UK organisation and you'd like to be maybe looking towards the States, looking towards the United States of America, and you see that as a big potential market, then please drop us an email to studio@businessconnectionslive.com or give us a call on 01784 256 777. Now, before we move on, can I just also say thank you very much to everybody who's downloading the programme on iTunes. We really appreciate you doing that. It really is fantastic. Thousands of you do it each and every month. It's easy to do, but you can help us by leaving a review. Here's how you do it. Just go to your iTunes account, find Business Connections Live, view it in iTunes. When you're there, you'll see all the different programs. Now, you'll see a tab that says ratings and reviews. Click on that, and that will take you to a tab. You okay over there? That'll take you to a tab where you can write yourself a review, leave 5 stars, say how great Linda was today, and that would be fantastic. And that's going to help other people actually to come and find and discover Business Connections Live. You're watching Business Connections Live. It's great to have you here on this Monday afternoon. We are live at the moment, and thank you very much. By the way, if you signed up to receive Business Connections Live in your inbox, thank you very much indeed for doing that. If you'd like to do it, you can just go to the website once again. Go to businessconnectionslive.com, go to the page, the home page, and you can sign up there to download a free copy of How to Handle the Media, but also you'll receive the programme every week, so you'll never ever, that'll teach you, miss an edition in the future. So then, going back to what we were talking about earlier on, we were talking about customs duties and paperwork, but predominantly we are a service industry country.
Which
What's
is an
gonna
interesting
happen?
point.
It is an interesting point. Thank you for agreeing
because
with
the
me.
trade in goods with the EU, they export more to us in goods, but we export more to them in services. And that's become an issue, of course, because our financial services, our banking system and so on, that's going to cause an issue with regard to the way that our services are received in the EU.
But is it not just a way around it by having a European headquarters, stick a building with 2 people in Dublin? There you go, you've got your European office, your new head office if you're Mr. Dyson in Singapore, but you've got a new European office, and that office can then deal with the city. So you've still got the same status.
Well, you've got that status in the EU, but of course that's something that we want to avoid. We want to keep services here in the UK. We want the world to come to us because our financial services system is the best in the world.
But could you see that actually moving to Frankfurt or to,
Well, there are
Paris?
noises in the direction of people moving to those areas, but they don't really have the infrastructure that we have here. And remember, our infrastructure has been built up over many, many years, and we are a trusted source with regard to finance. So although setup can be made elsewhere, I think that the people that are capable of carrying on the day-to-day services, the expertise, the structure that we have in the UK, I think would be very difficult to duplicate.
So positive then for Docklands then?
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We've been down many of the points that we wanted to cover. The assessment of any duties and charges, updating existing contracts, and so on. Let's just talk a little bit about where we're going as far as legally. What is going to happen as far as our laws, the European courts? What's going to happen there? Where will the buck stop? Will it eventually stop in UK courts, or will we still have to go to the European court?
Well, that goes back to looking at your existing contracts to find out exactly who's got jurisdiction on your contracts. What the UK will do is that if a case comes to them, they will look at the structure of the contract. And it may be that they will agree that, so for example, if the jurisdiction is Spain, but someone is trying to bring proceedings here, they may recommend that it's taken to Spain, or they may look at it from a point of view of the way that contract could be handled here on a common sense basis.
And what about when it comes to trade associations and trade organisations? Are they doing anything to help us? I understand there's a European Free Trade Association. So is that a UK-based or a European-based organisation?
European-based.
All right. So can they help at all in this and make it sort of more straightforward for us?
Well, it's difficult with regard to memberships, and again, it goes back to what's in the contracts that you've already negotiated and how closely attuned you are with some of these organisations. It may well be that membership is already there, and it's not just EFTA, but it's also, if you're an organisation like the motoring organisation, for example, all of the food services in this country, they've got all of their own organisations that can give a lot of advice about who to talk to, where to go, chambers of commerce, enterprise agencies, the CBI, FSB, all of those sort of organisations.
And finally then, schedules, UK schedules. What does that mean to small businesses?
So schedules are a list of commitments under the WTO that set tariffs, quotas and limits on subsidies. So we're putting together exactly, for example, what our tariffs are going to be here. But what we can't do is that we can't get a better deal under the WTO than any other member with regard to our tariffs, so we couldn't set our tariffs low.
So is that a case then that actually is setting to the lowest common denominator and not the best common denominator? And when you say that, how does that impact us? What does that mean?
Well, the impact is that we're on a level playing field with the rest of the world, but we can negotiate our free trade agreements with the rest of the world.
So it too carries its own restrictions?
Yes, it does.
So would that affect, for instance, our fisheries industry?
Yes. Yes, it would, especially with quotas, for example. How do you divvy up the quotas afterwards? So, for example, at the moment, our quotas within the EU, we've got a block quota, if you like. Well, you've got to separate that out into what's the EU's bit, what's the UK's bit. Once we've got the UK bit, how do we use that quota for the rest of the world, for example. What can they do? What can't they do? We've got to set all of that out.
So does Europe as a bloc trade with WTO as well?
Oh, they're a member of the WTO.
So they could, once again, they could still cause issues when it comes to the percentages.
Well, not really, because they're part of 164 other members, for example, who all have a say in exactly what happens.
And what about quotas on agriculture?
Same thing. How do you divvy that up? Agriculture, as we talked about earlier, are we going to subsidise our agriculture in this country? If we do, how much are we going to subsidise them by? Will that cause a problem with other WTO members if we go over and above agreed subsidies? These are all things that have got to be ironed out in the schedules. With
WTO, do you think that is something that we can manage and it would play to our benefits, do you think, or at least would allow us to continue in an ongoing situation?
It would allow us to continue in an ongoing situation. And remember, we were a member of WTO before we were a member of the EU. And so we've got a history of dealing with the WTO. So our civil servants and so on know where they're going with this.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've talked a lot about WTO. And I was just thinking while you were talking that I don't think I've heard anybody from the World Trade Organization speak. I'm sure my colleagues in the gallery will go, well, we have. Where have you been? Have you heard anything? No. So where are tell us more about the WTO if you can, just very briefly.
Well, the WTO, they can't take sides on this. They're just waiting for us to say, right, we're members of the WTO and we'd like to resurrect our membership, thank you very much. But there's not an awful lot the WTO can do until we come to some sort of arrangement here in the UK with exactly how we're leaving the EU.
All right, listen, we hope it's been a bit of help. I suppose we're trying to be soothsayers here, aren't we, with our crystal ball, trying to kind of figure out exactly what's going to be happening. Today is Monday the 28th, and of course the vote's tomorrow, isn't it?
Yes.
The 29th, or one of the votes anyway, the initial one. It is going to it's going to drag on and on and on. Do you think there'll be an extension?
It's possible, but I don't think it would be 9 months. Possibly 3, but I don't think it would be 9.
Really? Listen, we always ask our guests at the end of the programme to give the key takeaways from today's show. It's been really interesting. It's been a nice. Listen to that, nobody fought. There was no blood spilt, was there? And I think that's good when we talk about Brexit. We promise you there'll be no more Brexit programmes on the channel until the next one. So then, in your own time, straight down camera number 4, just over there, please, the key takeaways, say who you are and where you're from.
I'm Linda Bazant. I'm a barrister and GDPR and post-Brexit consultant. And today we've been talking about exactly what you need to do within your business to prepare for leaving the EU. You need to stress test your existing plans. You need to impact assess all the areas within your business that may have a Brexit component. Look at contracts, licenses, certificates, check on employee status, double check on tax and VAT with HMRC, data protection. Remember that we become a third country after the 29th of March if we do indeed leave then. Look at your counterparties. Are they Brexit proof? The third parties that you deal with. You're looking at your Brexit contingencies. Are they looking at theirs? Customs duties, paperwork, that sort of thing. Contracts generally, go back to your lawyers, have a look at the right to terminate, how you amend. Is there frustration in the contract? What's going to happen to currencies? Should you change your currency from euro to, for example, the US dollar? These are all the sorts of things that you need to be doing right now to Brexit-proof your business.
Excellent. Fantastic information there at the end. If you want to find out more about Linda, or if you'd like to contact her in her role as barrister and GDPR consultant, you can go to her website. It's that easy to do that. Here it is. It is LRB Consult Limited. And if we'll have a look at the screen, there she is. Is your organisation fully compliant? We look at GDPR, whistleblower, e-privacy. She's also a speaker as well if you want someone to come along to your event. And she will do still GDPR audits, but also will give you advice on what you should be considering when it comes to Brexit. You can find Linda's website at www.lindabazant.com. It's right in there, .com. lindabazant.com. You can go to her website, find out more, and you can also sign up. She's got a load of bits and pieces that you can download and you can watch on the site. That's lindabazant.com. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's program. It's been a bit different, isn't it? Been good fun. And we'll be back again next week. We've got more great programs lined up for you here throughout the course of the year. Sorry, there's been a bit... It's been a bit shaky over the last couple of weeks where we've missed a few programs out due to different reasons. Coming up on future programs, Troy Norcross is going to be talking about blockchain. Still interesting. It's had its ups and downs, blockchain. Currently it's on a down, but it could be coming back. Michael Brook. Now, have you ever thought about putting together an online training course? Have you ever sort of played with that as an idea? Seeing it perhaps as a way to increase passive income? So something that you're knowledgeable about, you put the course together and then people just come in and buy it. He will be sorting that out. He's professional excellence sales training is what he's going to be talking about there with Michael Brooks. It's going to be a good show. David Williams, Managing Director of Shuttle On Plug and Play Sales. Hang on, I'll read that again. David Williams, he's the Managing Director of Shuttle On. And he's going to be coming on talking about plug and play sales portals. And Angus Grady, Deborah Hume and Minerva, she's from Minerva Engagement, are going to be coming on the programme in the future as well. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's programme. Thank you very much as well. Don't forget what I said. If you're interested in approaching and getting involved in the US market, then get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live. But until we do it all again next week, next Monday at 12 noon, have a great week. From us, bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.